In fair play to all, we're also going to have a lady on this show, and our lady is Jean Adair Shriver. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm intrigued. Jean has written a book called The Einstein Solution. Everyone, I'm sure, knows who Einstein was. So let me ask you, first of all, how did you come up with the title for this book? And what was the sort of genesis for the whole thing? And basically, briefly, what is it all about?
Okay, the genesis was that I think in stories. You know, people think my husband's an engineer. He thinks in facts and measurements
And buildings.
Well, sort of. And people think in different ways. I think in stories. And when Einstein was made man of the century, I couldn't think of a story. I grew up across the street from him, but
Really?
right directly across the street. When you're a girl who can barely do long division,
I'm in there too.
You don't know what to say to a math genius, you know. Because it was World War II, this is a fiction book, but it's based on that fact and others. So I didn't have any stories about Einstein. My brother did. He once went over there to collect newspapers and...
From Einstein's house?
Yeah, well, he was it's a small house, John, very small, unpretentious, and he lived very simply without a car. My mother used to say, all very well for him, but his stepdaughter and niece have to walk up to the market in the snow and trudge the groceries home. My mother was not so admiring. But,
the fascinating thing about that is that when you think about Einstein, I mean, you have this image of this tremendously, I don't know, influential, powerful, interesting guy, and you sort of, at least I do, picture him living in this, I don't know about a mansion, but to listen to what you're telling me paints a whole different picture of him.
Right. Well, because it was wartime, it was gas rationing. And that meant that I walked a mile or so to my school, and he walked the other way to the Institute of Advanced Study. So we passed. But I had no stories, you know. So I started thinking about it in relation to young people. I like to write for younger people. And at the same time, there were other things that happened. I had read it was a lot of anti-Semitic prejudice, even while we're over fighting Hitler, who's about as anti-Semitic as you can get.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
It seemed rather ironic that our forces were over in Europe, you know, fighting this, and yet at home, girls in a private school could not accept a new Jewish girl. She happened to be the first in the school, but they just weren't very open to newcomers. Princeton was very small before the war, 10,000 people.
Given what you just told me about Einstein and the proximity of your house to his, the obvious question is, did you ever meet him yourself?
I walked by and I, you know, kind of nodded. He didn't he called Princeton people a collection of puny demigods on stilts.
What?
He was not fond of
Tell me that again. What did he say?
A collection of puny demigods on stilts.
Good Lord.
So my grandmother used to give Sunday night suppers, just buffets.
Right.
And occasionally his stepdaughter and his niece, or actually it was his secretary by that time, would come. But he never came. He had friends and, well, like the Secretary of State or people like that, but he didn't care to socialize, you know, in town. So I never could meet him that way. I would have had to say, "Hi, Mr. Einstein."
Do you, I don't know how old you were when this took place, but was part of it, were you shy or?
I've
No.
never been shy.
Never been shy.
I just didn't have anything to say. The girl up the street, now this is a true story. I think she's died. I know her name, but maybe I better not say it. But it is true. It's in all the books. She went up and offered him brownies if he'd do her math homework. But we all
what a
knew-
great story.
We all knew Adelaide was a nut. And he answered that it wouldn't be fair to the other children.
So this particular book, is this your first book or one of many? How does that work out?
Neither. It's one of two.
One of two.
Right.
And the other one is about?
The other one is about an old farmhouse. Again, there's truth in it. That was our old farmhouse, you know, an ancient farmhouse in Massachusetts that had to be sold. And that's my germ of an idea. This one, it was looking for an Einstein story.
The other thing that intrigues me about talking to you is, you know, neither you nor I are 20 anymore. And for
Really?
for people watching, looking at you and listening to you, I'm sure some of them were saying to themselves, how could I, you know, let's say I'm 50 and I want to start writing. I don't necessarily want to ask you how old you were when you started writing, but I guess that evolves into the question, what advice would you give to people who want to write a book but sort of say, well, I'm too old to start writing? How would you encourage them?
Well, that's the nice thing about the arts is you're never too old. You just need, I think, if you're going to start without ever having done it before, you need some subject you feel very strongly about that makes it worthwhile.
And you obviously felt very strongly about this.
I did. I feel very strongly about prejudice, and I just found out some very interesting facts about Einstein, who felt very strongly about racism. I just read a whole book about his attitude towards racism in Princeton. So I feel strongly about racism. I actually loved my childhood. And the other thing, I think, I do a lot of book reviewing at 15th Street, volunteer for the 4th and 5th grade. And I try to explain to them that World War II was different than any war they might have known.
I agree with you because I grew up in London during the Blitz and everything.
You would surely, yes.
But I've got to ask you, what makes you say that? Why do you, I mean, I know why it was, but why do you think it was different?
Well, I know it was, and it's in the book too. We collected scrap, we ran all over town, we hauled it in our little wagons. We bought war stamps at school, and I came home and I said to my mother, I need more money for stamps. And she said, why? And I said, they told us we have to buy a bomb. And my mother said, I don't think that can be true. And I said, yes, we do. We have to buy a war bomb. They said so. And, you know, my grandfather was head of the gas rationing board, so that's why we had almost no gas. Other people chiseled a little bit. We didn't have, you know.
But you grew up in this country.
Yes.
I say that because I grew up in London, and
yeah.
you know, when I hear that, I mean, the whole rationing thing in England was completely different from what you guys have here.
After the war, you still did,
Yeah,
you know.
for a long time.
Yeah.
This book, what sort of, I mean, do you feel it's a book for everybody or a certain generation or age range?
Well, technically, in the world of technical book, you know, thing, it's a middle grade. The most popular, the most best-selling group of books right now is YA, which is sort of teenage, the vampire books and that Twilight, they're very good sellers. I didn't want to deal with teenage, so this is just below. But I have a lot of adult friends who bought it and read it and enjoyed it. Won't take you long.
The last question I want to ask you is what I've asked the other authors, and that is, given your really, I think, interesting life and your perspective on racism and all those things and the culmination of writing this book, what has been in your life your proudest moment, either in your life or as it relates to writing?
I heard you ask one of the authors that, and I blanked.
You blanked? You've led such an interesting life, though.
Well, I have, but proudest, somehow that's not a proudest.
Or your greatest achievement. I mean, it must have been, when I think of all the people that want to have a book published, the number of people that actually get them published is really very small, so that must have been an achievement for you.
Well, it was. the time that Delacorte called up and told me that I had won, you know, the rights to get my first book published, that was thrilling. But, you know, proudest, that might be 3 healthy babies in 3 years with no anesthetic. Who knows?
I would say so. Thank you very much for coming in, Jean. Very nice talking to you.
Nice
You're a
to talk
fine,
to you.
wonderful lady, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.